Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of the finance area of Institute of Management and Technology, IMT Ghaziabad. Our webinar on the implication of COVID on the financial sector. If we recall, the budget that the Honorable Finance Minister presented in the Parliament on the 1st of February, it did not have any mention of COVID-19. It estimated the rate of economic growth to about 5.5%. What we see today, by the best of estimates, the rate of growth in the FY 2021 is be negative. What does it mean? Is that the world economy is in shatters, Indian economy is in shatters. And this is all because we are caught by a phenomenon known as COVID-19, which is not only invisible, but its rays, its depth, its width, and its potential for damage is totally unpredictable. So far, it has been destructive, not only the social life, but also the economic life and the human life. Looking into the financial sector, the size of the financial system in India, of the order of $1.7 trillion, is in shambles. We look at the likely losses in the corporates in India, which during the lockdown periods are expected to be anywhere in the order of 8 to 9 lakh crores. By RBI's own admissions, the NPAs are expected to be 9.9%. And remember, these are all without assessing the impact of COVID. A couple of days ago, we had Moody's rating for Government of India, and they downgraded the Government of India rating to a notch above an investment grade and with a negative outlook. It again said that this downgrade or their assessment does not have any bearing or the impact of the COVID. So what they mean is that they had, while upgrading in 2017, they identified certain imponderables. They assessed the capabilities of the Government of India and Indian economy to mitigate those. Now, in retrospect, they find that their assessment was not right, and they have downgraded. And this downgrade is without taking into account the impact of the COVID. It also says that the stress in the financial sector is far wide and more deeper than what it appears to be. This webinar today, therefore, tries to focus on some of the issues, what causes, what is the impact, and what is thereafter. So it takes a stock of where is the financial sector today after 75 days of the lockdown, and where it is destined to be after or till the COVID-19. Is that are the government of measures taken by the Government of India, or for that matter RBI, are yielding the desired effects with the contradictions and the conflict, and where are we towards? Do we need to do something more than what the Government of India and the RBI has done? And thirdly, is the impact on the banks and the non-banking financial sector, their ability to serve the economy. What does it mean in terms of Atmanirbhar financial sector, and how critical Atmanirbhar financial sector is for Atmanirbhar Bharat, that is to restarting India and also to take the India back to the growth trajectory, and many other issues related to these aspects. And not the least, ladies and gentlemen, what does it mean for a finance manager, for a CFO, for a financial professional, and in general, to the management and the finance education in the country? Do we equip our managers enough to deal with the risk? Possibly we are doing, but are we equipping them to manage uncertainties? And uncertainties has become the order of the day. And to discuss all these things, we have a distinguished panel before us. And we are going to have Mr. Jaishankar, who, when we invited him, was the executive director of National Housing Board. But in the last couple of days, he has been elevated to the managing director of IFCL, that is one of the largest infrastructure finance company in the country. And till then, he has deputed his deputy, Mr. Gaurav Kumar, who has transformed himself from a conventional banker to a developmental banker under the guidance and the leadership of Mr. Jaishankar, when in his earlier tenure he was with the IFCL. To begin, and we have Mr. Madan Sabhanwis, eminent economist, and also Miss Professor Barnali Chikaldhar. She is a professor of finance and the chair of the finance area in the IMT Ghaziabad. Let me start with Mr. Madan Sabhanwis. Mr. Madan Sabhanwis is an alumni of St. Stephen's, and also the alumni postgraduate he did from the Delhi School of Economics. He has an illustrious career with, and I can say he's an economist by practice as well. He has been economist in the ICICI, erstwhile ICICI Limited, then the ICICI Bank, and thereafter he has been the chief economist of the ICRA ratings. He has been, a prolific writer. He has written by now 2,500 articles in the financial dailies. Remember, when he told me and we talked about it, I was myself surprised, 2,500 articles. And you happen to read every now and then his write-ups in the financial dailies in India. And you know, if you go to his blog, he says he believes in contrarian thinking, and he possibly seems to a revolutionary economist. And he has written one of the books, which, if I'm right, Mr. Madan Sabhanwis, is that don't believe the truth of what the economics says till you realize it. And he has written by now 3 books. So we have within him an economist and also a practicing economist. So with that, may I request you, Mr. Madan Sabhanwis, to kindly take us through the horizon of this subject in its breadth and its depth. Maybe then later on we will come up with the question answers. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mr. Haldia, for having me out here, and thanks to the audience for coming at this rather odd hour of 6 p.m. In fact, when I was asked to come and speak at 6 p.m., I was, of course, delighted because that's after my official hours, but I was wondering if there will be any audience after 6. Quite clearly, I can see there are quite a few people who have come here, which shows the level of interest or probably the intrigue which goes along with this entire concept of COVID. Now, let me just begin by saying that while all of us keep talking of the COVID impact, I think actually what we're referring to is not really so much the pandemic as much as the shutdown. Because I think in the month of March, when the Indian government decided to go in for a shutdown, we did it because everybody was doing it. And it was felt that 3 weeks of shutdown would, along with social distancing, would ensure that the epidemic doesn't really spread. But now that we are through with over 2 months of the shutdown, I think the realization is that while we could still debate what could have been the conditions in case we didn't go for a shutdown, but quite logically speaking, I think the shutdown was probably not a great idea, not just in India, but also in other countries. Because what really happens when you have a shutdown is that we destroy economic value. And it's just not possible for the government. So this entire system of having the shutdown and the unlocking of the lockdown, which we are talking of, is more a man-made creation. While in retrospect, all of us can be wise, but at that particular point of time, we thought that maybe it was a good idea or the only thing which one could do. But today, definitely, we are looking at how to really revive the economy. It's a revival of an economy which we have throttled by our own hands. I think that's the irony of this particular situation. Because the moment we said that economic activity stops, it meant that all your producer services as well as services, I think lots of these sectors actually came to a standstill. We drew a line saying that it's only the essential production which could proceed. So therefore, we had the FMCG sector, the pharmaceutical sector. I mean, these were the ones which were still on their feet. Whereas if you looked at the other sectors, I think they came totally to a standstill. And in fact, if you looked at the PMI, which came out for the month of April, manufacturing somewhere between 26, 27, which is quite logical given the fact that all production activity was prohibited in the month of April. A lot of that carries on into May. And then we had these packages being introduced by the government more recently. Though in the month of March, we had the Reserve Bank of India as well as the government of India also making certain announcements. And if one has to sort of summarize what these measures of the government are in a sentence or two, I would say that the entire onus of reviving the economy or providing a stimulus to the economy actually has been transferred to the financial sector. So that's the crux of it, because one kind of criticism which has been there for the economic packages that there's nothing much on the demand side. The government is not really spending on providing a fiscal stimulus. There have been no tax cuts, no higher announcements in capital expenditure. There is, of course, a certain amount of money which is being spent on relief, which is more for sustenance rather than for a stimulus for growth. And looking into all the measures which have been announced in 5 tranches by the finance minister, it looks quite evident that most of them are in the medium term. They're going to work over the medium term. And all of them are relying invariably on the financial sector. It could be the commercial banks, it could be SIDBI, it could be NABARD, it could be certain PSUs when it comes to discoms. So the fulcrum seems to be the financial sector. So whatever kind of revival we're looking at today is more on the supply side, and it's trying to be addressed on the issue of liquidity. Because I think this entire issue of pandemic has 3 problems of 3 L's, I would say. Liquidity is one, labor is second, and third is logistics. It is an issue. I think probably we didn't manage it well because we are trying to open up the economy just at the time we are trying to send them back to their hometowns. So I don't think anybody in their right mind will ever think of coming back to the place of work, given the kind of hardships and the travails which have gone through. Logistics is something which are still being ironed out, I would say. When I say logistics, it's essentially the supply chains which have to be ironed out for any enterprise to work. And this is where we have a problem of federalism in India, because the center says something and every state has their own rules, while I think there's a bit of convergence taking place in most states between the center and the states. But I think there are lots of states which have their own inhibitions about movement of goods, movement of human beings. So I think that is something which will probably take another month or 2 to iron out. But then it comes to liquidity. I think we have tackled this issue with a good amount of alacrity. Because if you look at what the Reserve Bank of India did starting from the month of March, A, we have looked at lowering the repo rate. We have looked at lowering the reverse repo rate even by a greater extent. No longer was the 25 basis points corridor maintained. The whole idea was that let's make it unattractive for banks to invest in the reverse repo. Instead, let them try and use the liquidity which they have for more productive purposes, lending to the commercial sector. Then there were a number of LTROs which came through, that is long-term repo operations, where essentially banks are given money at the repo rate, which was lowered, and then you could invest it probably in the bond market. Then they had something called a TLTRO, which said that you can invest it in NBFC paper. Then they also spoke in terms of another kind of an LTRO, which was there specifically for the mutual funds when they had the Templeton problem, which came up. So there were a number of measures which were used by the RBI to make sure that liquidity was available. So as a central bank, what can you expect the RBI to do? Provide liquidity, make sure interest rates are low. But the question always comes upon, how do I force banks to lend more? Okay, because it's a commercial decision taken by banks, and banks will have to look at the balance sheet quality. They will have to look at the future. They will have to look at what the costing is. They have to look at the credit worthiness of the borrower. Only then will they go ahead and lend. Now, in between, starting from the month of March, something which was reiterated in the month of May, the RBI also spoke in terms of giving a moratorium on all term loans, increasing the working capital limits for SMEs. And this was something which was reiterated even in the month of May. They already made compensatory measures saying that if you're not receiving your payments on time, it won't be an NPA. So this has been extended by 3 months. So therefore, there is a lot of measures which have been taken by the RBI to make the banks feel more comfortable to lend. But talk to the bankers, and I think we get a different kind of a picture. They were saying that a moratorium means a company does not have the ability to pay or does the willingness, because most companies, even if they had the ability, said not sure how long this lockdown lasts. Even though my liquidity position is comfortable today, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen tomorrow, and therefore I would need to make use of this particular moratorium. So therefore the moratorium was made use of. Now, as a banker, I would always say that, look, if a company X out here is not servicing its loan, should I actually be lending more money to the same company? Okay, so that's where the credit risk issue comes up, that bankers have been very much hesitant, though nobody will overtly say that I don't want to lend, but they've definitely been more cherry picking their clients because they feel that a company which is not in a position to pay in 3 months will not be in a position to pay also in 6 months, and whatever will happen after 9 months, one doesn't really know. So I think when the RBI has extended this moratorium by another 3 months, so we're talking of 6 months of moratorium, the borrowers would be keen to know whether there's going, and bankers are going to be even that much more cautious when it comes to lending because they're always concerned about their NPAs. We should just remember that even in the past, when we had all those various scams which came out maybe around 2012, 2013, and we have this huge buildup of restructured assets. Then we had the asset quality recognition brought in by the RBI governor, Dr. Rajan, at one point of time. And then we saw the ballooning of all the NPAs. I think lots of banks were caught on the wrong foot. And after that, they've been very, very cautious when it comes to lending. So there's been a lot of reluctance on the part of banks to lend. And even today, if you talk to them, they say, okay, for 3 months, it's not an NPA, 6 months, it's not an NPA. What happens after 9 months? And today, when the RBI has given guidance that GDP growth is going to be negative, they haven't mentioned any number, but our sense is it could be anywhere between -1% to -10%, because honestly, one doesn't know how this unlocking of the lockdown is going to take place, how long it will take place, what will be, how is it going to be done sequentially, which sectors are going to be affected. Presently, it looks as if the services sectors are really down and out. You talk of hospitality, aviation, you're talking of the media, entertainment. I think all these sectors have been hit quite badly in a sense of this particular lockdown, and are likely to revive probably only after in the second half of the year. Even within manufacturing, there's this whole issue of saying that, okay, today all companies are allowed to produce even non-essential goods, but I have to also make sure that the labor is available. I have to make sure the logistics are in place. Only then will things start moving. So in this kind of a situation, what we have reached is that banks are reluctant to lend. There's a lot of liquidity in the system, a lot of this liquidity which banks have. They're putting it into reverse repo auctions, which have been around 4, 5, 6 lakh crores on a daily basis. And while the RBI and government are trying to nudge the banks to lend more, I think the banks are still playing cautious, at least on the supply side. Now, one of the measures which the government of India came up with, I think when they had those 5-point program or 5 tranches which came out, was to say that one way to enable banks to lend is to give a guarantee. Okay, so you have this entire concept of SMEs lending of 3 lakh crores, saying that the government will give 100% guarantee for all the borrowings which are done by these SMEs from banks. They've stipulated the time frame, I think it's up to October or so. So this is something which gives comfort to the banks that if you lend to the SMEs and the SME is not able to repay, there would definitely be a compensation coming from the government. Similarly, if you look at the NBFCs, I think they have given a kind of a guarantee for 30,000 crores. They've given a partial credit enhancement for another 45,000 crores. The whole idea is that by building up this contingent liability for the government of India, it doesn't really affect the fiscal numbers, but it does provide a lot of comfort to the financial system so that banks are more enthusiastic, they're more enthused to lend. Now, this is interesting because when we keep talking to, say, the SMEs, the constant answer is that, look, this is a great idea that is a guarantee being given, because otherwise. But for us to go ahead and borrow money from the banking system, I need to make sure that there is demand for my product. I should be able to have my production process in place. So these are train of thought which comes here is that I cannot start my production today because if I'm on my to start, the company which I'm supplying my goods, which normally could be, say, we are an ancillary unit to a big manufacturer. The big manufacturer has to start going off in full steam. Only then will there be demand for my products. Only then can I get into production. Now, if I get into production, we're back to square one because we go around in circles because they say that all my labor has disappeared. My labor is basically the migrant labor, which has gone back to their hometowns. So how do I get this labor even when I decide to start my production? If I have my labor, is the logistics in place? Are my supply chains in place? That becomes another issue for the SMEs. So what we have seen here is that at this particular point of time, one hopes that what I'm saying is only a temporary phenomenon. But at this particular point of time, maybe 2 weeks after all the announcements have been made by the finance minister, that the demand for funds is not what one would have expected. At the same time, the supply continues to be thwarted to a certain extent because of the credit risk aversion, which is there from the point of view of banks. And therefore, we have a situation out here where growth in credit is not really still taking place. Of course, there are certain numbers which have been given out by certain banks. I think saying on 1st June, there were X amount of loans which were sanctioned to SMEs. So one just hopes that that is in the right direction, because if these funds go to the SMEs, it will definitely be beneficial. But again, it depends. One has to see whether this money which is borrowed is used for production, or is it used for non-productive purposes? Is it being used to service old loans? One will never know about that. I think only probably after 6 months or so, we'll get to know whether these funds have been productively used by the borrowers. So as far as the financial system is concerned, I think bankers are also very much worried about what could be happening to the NPA levels at a later point of time. While everything has been forgiven, or you're sort of saying that the definitions are different, you won't be calling your NPAs today. But at some point of time, there is this feeling that your companies will not be able to service the debt, especially if GDP growth is negative this year. Maybe next year, everybody is hopeful that on account of a statistical low base, we could probably be having a growth rate of 6-7% in 21-22. But one can never really say what's going to happen. And we have seen in the past that when economic activity slows down, GDP growth slows down, NPAs tend to increase. So our own sense is that currently, what Mr. Haldia had spoken about NPAs being in the region of around 9.9, 10%, there could be an easier 50% increase in NPA level to something close to 15%. Now, another issue which was touched upon was about the NBFCs. Now, an interesting factor which I would like to place here is that when we had a TLTROs which came on, where there was a special amount of funds which were being allocated specifically for NBFCs, especially the lower rated it was meant for the lower rated NBFCs. We had seen that there was hardly any interest from the point of view of the banks. So while there was an amount of around 50,000 crores which was announced, we saw that for these medium-sized MSMEs, the banks really did not go and bid for the full amount. In fact, I think the first auction was for around 25,000 crores, not more than 50% was bid for, because banks again are a bit cautious about this fact, saying that if I'm going to lend to the lower-rated NBFCs, the ones which don't have that kind of a good credit worthiness standing, we'll have a problem later on in terms of repayment. So as of now, one can say that the NBFCs, which are a very important source of finance for us, because I think when they say the last mile connectivity is performed by the NBFCs in a very effective manner, especially when you're talking in terms of some of the SMEs, you're talking in terms of real estate, But we should remember that the ability of most of these sectors to perform, and I'm talking of real estate in particular, is that real estate is considered to be a sensitive sector by banks. So banks don't do too much of lending out there. And NBFCs have really filled in this particular position in a very effective manner. So therefore, there is reason for one to believe that this particular chunk of credit which goes to real estate is going to get impacted both ways. The real estate sector is going to recover probably towards the fag end of the year, because this is where labor is required, labor is missing. And at the same time, the NBFCs themselves, especially the lower rated NBFCs, they would need to have access to finance in order to go ahead and support this particular kind of a sector. So on the whole, I would tend to believe that what the government has done so far is more on the supply side through the liquidity measures. They have done fairly adequate, but I think one thing good is that they're not forced. You're provided a kind of an environment which is congenial for lending, but the choice is finally a commercial decision which has to be taken by banks. Banks and NBFCs are going to be a bit cautious when it comes to lending. Wherever there is a guarantee being provided, like there's some the credit policy had spoken about SIDBI and NABARD giving certain kind of guarantees, certain kind of funding which is coming as refinance. I think those are the things which are more likely to work. But in the absence of any kind of a guarantee or kind of protection buffer being provided by these institutions, there would still be a problem for the end user to actually source finance from the financial system. And overall, I think the financial system is one thing which has been up and working. I would say that's been one of the positive things, because if you look at the entire manufacturing sector, a large part of it was down around 80 to 90% has been non-functional in the month of April, opening up gradually. Services, some services absolutely shut down. But if you're looking at the financial sector services, both in terms of your banks, financial institutions, as well as stock markets, mutual funds, I think all of them have been functioning. The lockdown has not really had that much of an impact in terms of the functioning. But definitely, I think, given the past experiences in terms of lending leading to higher levels of NPAs, there's a lot of caution which is being exercised by the banking system. And as I mentioned, the demand side is something which has not been met by the government. So if really one asks, should the government be doing something more? Ideally, there should have been some kind of a stimulus provided by saying I spend 1% of GDP, which is around 2 lakh crores immediately on capital expenditure. I get back my labor, I restore my supply chains. I'm able to provide income to people. I'm able to increase spending. That itself can provide a very virtuous linkage, especially to the SMEs in terms of their supply of goods and services, and sort of create the kind of demand. But quite evidently, this has not been done. We were also hoping that maybe there could be some tax cuts so that you and I will also be beneficiaries, because we have the spending power. And right now with this lockdown uncertainty, I think our consumption has also come down. So the consuming class also probably required some kind of tax cut breaks. But I think the government has decided to stick more to fiscal prudence, and probably after what Moody's has done, we can discuss that later, there would be a little more caution in terms of how to really manage your fiscal balances. And the government has, well, I don't really expect government to do anything more, especially in terms of any thing which requires a fiscal deficit number to go up. It's going to be more through this kind of indirect support which is being provided through the financial system. So the financial system does hold the clue. How it works will also depend just not on the financial system, but also in terms of the borrowers. Thank you.
Mr. Madan, you have given a very detailed exposition of where, in fact, the dilemma before the government and before the financial sector. But if I can, before I move to Professor Barnali and Mr. Gaurav, one immediate question that comes to my mind is challenge before the government and the RBI is to restore the financial sector, then stabilize it, and then lead it to the growth, so that ultimately is able to support the growth of the economy, restoration of the growth of the economy. But we are in a catch-22 situations. We have liquidity, but there are the industry which are starving hunger for the hunger for the liquidity. They are not getting the funds. The funds are getting the banks have the funds which are easily available at a lower cost, but those funds are not available to the industry. The another challenge is, while they are not getting the funds, at the same time they have blocked the revival and the restructuring of the stress assets by keeping the IBC in the hibernation for 6 months and extending it for another 6 months. The banks, while everybody says that they are risk averse, but if the SBI chairman is to believe, and which to me rightly so, They are not risk averse. They are trying to be risk prudent. So if they continue to remain risk prudent, they are not going to be lending. If they are not going to be lending, they are going to be stress assets. But there is no exit because the IBC route is closed. In the US, they have the trouble assets relief program, which the US government brought in, and something on the lines the UK government also brought in. We do not have any such package. What we are going to be after 6 months or 1 year is, I mean, doesn't appear to be a dreadful scenario.
It's definitely going to be a difficult scenario because, as I mentioned also earlier, see, right now, lots of things get camouflaged because of the way in which we are treating these assets. But at some point of time, I think we will have to recognize them as they are. And I would tend to believe that the Reserve Bank of India will give enough notice to the banks, maybe 6 months in advance or 1 year in advance, as to when you start recognizing these assets. Because as you have rightly mentioned, I think NPAs is one step away from the IBC, and one could be expecting a larger levels of insolvencies happening on account of this lockdown, which has happened. Because today it's very, very impressionistic when we say that it's affecting everybody negatively, but how negative it's going to be for enterprise is something which we'll get to know maybe after a year. And there will be a huge pileup of assets, a pileup of cases which go to the IBC too. And I think that's one of the reasons why banks have been what you are calling prudent. I would say risk averse is not using any kind of a euphemism out there. I'd say, yeah, if I'm a banker, because in fact, some public sector bankers have also told me that I don't want to take a decision today. After 2 years after I retire, I don't want the CBI and the CID or what were those people coming after banging at my doors. So I'd rather be prudent or risk averse. Yeah, so I think that's a problem which we're going to have. So therefore, I don't think situation is very nice for the banks as of now, because you have only increased the uncertainty in terms of how they are managing the balance sheets.
Now, if I can toss up this question to Mr. Gaurav Pamar before Mr. Jaishankar joins us, or hopefully joins us after from the meeting in the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Gaurav, we had the crisis of 2008. And India was largely remain unscathed to the extent that our fundamental the sectors in the economy other than the financial sector were still going strong. But we had in the 2016 and onwards the crisis of the banks and the financial institutions, the quality of the assets and the stress in the economy. And the COVID 2019, it has accelerated the gravity of the problem that the financial sector was at the beginning of the COVID. Now, how do you see the stress assets resolution? Because if I remember, in 2008, the RBI gave the regulatory, what we call it, a subvention that anything and everything done so far is ignored and you can go for a one-time restructuring. And then they went to the mechanism of CDRs, and then they went to the mechanism of what we call it S4 and different other kinds of restructuring. So they kept on shifting the problems. Then finally came in 2016, when possibly the RBI governor said no more and no further, and it's time to, call a halt. Now, how do you see that scenario and now into 2019 when you are again going to the liberal funding? And how do you see your role as a one of the largest infrastructure finance companies? How difficult it is for you now in terms of your portfolio, and how difficult it is going to be in the times to come if you extend, shift the problem through the moratorium and then through the one-time restructuring, hopefully, and through the other kinds of restructuring. And what the word Mr. Madan used is the camouflaging, what we call in terms of the financial restructuring.
As was also being mentioned, if you're looking at what Mr. Madan was saying of a 15% NPA at hand, though we're talking about 10 to 14%, and comes with that the stressed asset portfolio, which will be almost double the size. So we're talking about more than about 60% of the book getting affected. What we were hoping is that there has to be, as you mentioned earlier, a one-time measure which is given so that the book can be clean. But if we think about how it can be done, It's mainly by infusing more funds or making available the funds. Otherwise, my book completely goes off and the capital adequacy is not met. So what we have also been suggesting and hoping for is that there will be some funds which will be available, maybe utilize the other idle funds in the RE fund or the other corpuses which are available and pool the whole thing together and then support for cleaning up the balance sheet to that extent. Further, what we were hoping is that since the liquidity is going to be strained for the projects as such, specifically for PPP projects where there are concessions to it, and we're talking about of a moratorium 6 months currently, but looking at what happens around the world, it is not less than 12 months. So if you're talking about 6 to 12 months of moratorium, we are hoping that the concessions are also deferred to that extent so that the projects get more breathing space. Because currently, as historically, the projects anyways have been funded with a lower tenor. So if the banks and the lenders can extend that tenor and give some breathing space to the project to make available of whatever small revenue they start to build in of after a while. So that's something which will be there. We will also have to be very wary about external ratings going down to the projects, which means that again the project's ability to sustain itself by way of either raising more funds or the lenders wanting to give them more funds in terms of before they are actually showing too much of stress, that will also go down. So that's where we are hoping that some measures which will be made further by RBI and by the government stating that these funds are available for especially infrastructure projects where we will be seeing a lot of stress coming in, if not impairment. So that's what we are hoping, sir. And currently, looking at what the IBC is doing, I think we are. I mean, all the lenders, I'm sure, will agree at this. Just being able to talk, and they really don't see where resolution is going to happen, because we are also seeing a trend where projects which were doing on the borderline cases have also started to show signs or give signals that we need to brace up. So that's going to be a challenge, but it's all about how much capital will be available for us to clean our books by the end of the moratorium comes in, sir.
Thank you. And we have with us Professor Barnali, who is the chair of the finance area in IMT Ghaziabad, and she has been a visiting professor, a regularly visiting professor at a Kapstein University in Austria, and he has been a very regular, contributor at the national and international conferences in terms of the research studies and the case studies, particularly in the area of the corporate finance and the earning management. She's with us, and Professor Barnali, we have today about 11,000, NBFCs. Out of these 11,000 NBFCs, we have about 263 NBFCs, which are systematically important NBFCs. The government has taken various measures, and Mr. Madan and Mr. Gaurav have explained what does the government measures mean in form and substance, in effect. How do you see what the government has done so far for the NBFC sector, and what is that the NBFC should be themselves doing in order to come out of this difficult situation?
Okay. Good evening to all. Mr. Madan has already explained a lot of measures of NBFCs, but I'll still see if I can touch upon a little more. As you can see that, NBFC's growth has been remarkable. In fact, there was a time when they were giving competition to banks. But the problem is what kind of competition? Because the growth rate was high, but if you see the delinquency rate of NBFCs, that was almost double the industry standard. If you see the report of RBI, which was published on June 27, 2019, you would see that in almost all the sectors, delinquency rate of NBFC was double that of industry standards, which indicates that NBFC had to be a little cautious in giving loans to the borrowers. And particularly NBFC was it's a welcome to our society, because there are particularly unorganized sectors, and also, like for example, there are tractor owners, vehicle owners, etc., who would want loans, and it is not always possible for them to go to banks and borrow money, and it takes some time also. So NBFCs came forward. They were friendly in handling these customers and gave loan. But then, that is then there was a problem, and it of course started with, we all know that it started with ILFS crisis, which happened in September 2018. And we were all very surprised to see that ILFS, it was an NBFC, and which had promoters like LIC and SBI, etc., had problems, and there were certain governance issues. And in fact, what actually ILFS had done was they had procured short-term loan in the form of commercial papers, etc. And then they could not, and they invested all that in the long-term sector, long-term infrastructure sector. So there was a gross asset liability mismatch in their case. And it happened that they could not repay their CPs on time, commercial papers on time, and they did it a little later, although. And then there was another problem, because they could not pay loans, also repay loans, because they had very little money with themselves. So that was the time when actually mutual fund companies, etc., stopped funding to ILFs. ILFs wanted to go for a rollover financing, and people did not do. And by the time, if you recall, then DHFL also backed out. They also could not meet their interest payment on time. So as a result, the entire faith on NBFC sector came down, and they were not like mutual fund, etc., were not eager to give, not at all interested in giving.
Mr. Pranali, if I can interrupt, because now the problem is far more graver, because the NBFCs are facing the liquidity problem and the solvency problems.
I'm coming to that.
That is across the board. Now, how they do come out of this problem with the RBI having taken measures, whether those measures really help the NBFCs?
I will come to that. That is there, like as you know, the NBFCs were slowly recovering, and they were trying to get back to the water, and then there was this shark in the name of COVID. But then the problem is that government did come out with this moratorium period for borrowers, which NBFC had to give to their borrowers. But this was only one way. And because NBFCs, NBFCs were dependent, highly dependent on bank loans as a part of borrowing. And if you look at the statistics, then you would see that banks were very choosy in giving loans to NBFCs, And the statistics says that I would say 50% of the loans actually went to 50% of the total exposures to NBFC by banks went to top 10 NBFC, which again indicates what Mr. Madan had emphasized, that banks were interested in giving loans to only NBFCs whose asset quality was good and which had a good balance sheet. Now that happened, and you would see that 80% of the total exposure went to top 30 NBFCs. Again, now the question is that, again, as I said, it is a one-way, moratorium was one way. NBFCs were giving moratorium to its borrowers, but NBFCs were unable to avail that from the banks, because banks were not interested in giving them a moratorium. Banks were saying that, okay, you repay your finance and take a fresh loan, take a fresh credit line. Now, that is what bankers wanted. They wanted to do it on a case by case basis, have a look at their cash flow statement, cash budget, and then give loan. But now this was okay. But then the problem with NBFC was that, again, this would mean that you repay your finance from your liquidity, from your liquid assets, you repay your loan and take fresh loan. That will again mean a window of about 20 days or so. So that was indicating the cost of borrowing for NBFCs. This is one problem.
Mr. Gaurav, you are infrastructure. We have the national pipeline, 6,500 projects with a total outlay of more than 1 lakh crore. And I'm sure, Madan, I would also look for your indulgence. Now, as a country, we have wherewithal to raise those finance, particularly when we have Moody's ratings, which is just one notch above the junk rating. And second thing, the related question is that, the stress assets financing, it's a different ballgame altogether. Do we have that market in India? Has the government done anything for the development of a corporate bond market? And do you think as an IIFCL, you are playing any role in development of the corporate bond? I know for certain that while Mr. Jaishankar was there, we worked with him and develop a certain innovative, structured, financial solution, which in terms of the mortgage funding and the credit enhancement, reverse mortgages, others. But then where is the funding and how do you raise that fund, particularly when the rating was just one notch above the junk rating and you don't have a corporate bond? So how do you raise the funds for the stress projects?
Yes, sir. So that's where I was mentioning that we will hope that the government comes back with some packages in terms of funds being made available to these sectors. Having said that, we have already got a lot of liquidity in terms of capital infusion from the government. So that's where we will now be in a position to deploy further. The question is, where do we deploy? So as you mentioned, the infrastructure pipeline, which is the NIP, currently constitutes about 24% to energy sector, 18 to the road sector, and 17 to the urban sector, and urban infra, and 12 to the railways. That's about 71% of the composition. We will now think that this needs to be recalibrated and maybe shifts more towards the urban infrastructure, including social and healthcare and education kind of things. So that's where something will need to be done in terms of how you extend credit to these projects, because everybody understands that the energy sector, because of the DISCOM issues, is going to be facing even more greater challenges. And road sector, because of annuities being the stream for funds and or the tolls, both of them going to be more strained in the current situation. Coupled with what the country needs in terms of healthcare and education, we think that's where to start the cycle afresh, that's where the projects will be. Coming to where the funds are going to come from, it's more from what the government is going to do currently. As I said, they've infused a lot of capital into IIFCL, which we expect to deploy now to the two sectors where we can fund in the next about a year or so. And we expect about 10,000 crores also coming in by November or so. So that's where, the funds are going to be made available. It obviously is not going to be from project.
Mr. Madan, we do not have enough domestic saving as of now. And obviously, that is not going to be generated adequately in the next few months or in some years. And because of this rating downgrade, the flow of foreign investment might also get adversely affected. How do you see the funds coming from? And would the investors still believe in the Growth India story?
I have a slightly different view, Mr. Haldia, because notwithstanding what our credit rating has been given by Standard & Poor and Moody's even in the past, we have seen that India continues to draw one of the largest amounts of foreign direct investment. We get around maybe $60–65 billion on an annual basis, because this is where there is a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of scope, we have a democracy, money is safe when a foreign investor puts money out here. So I think that thing will continue to flow in. It will, of course, depend upon what is the amount of funds which is available that can be deployed by the potential investors outside outside India. So I think that shouldn't be a problem. But I think the serious problem is in terms of this NIP, in terms of funding. I think a large part has to come from the government, and that is inescapable. We cannot really be expecting the private sector to chip in. And as long as the government, both the center and the states, have problems on the fiscal side, we have seen that they have tended to cut down on the capital expenditure. So that will always be a problem, and that's also a kind of an opportunity, because as long as we have this lacunae in infrastructure, I think there will be an inducement for foreign investors to also come in. So FDI, ECBs, maybe corporate bonds raising by public sector companies, I think these are the ones which are going to chip in and provide this finance. But definitely there will be a lacunae, there's going to be a demand-supply gap, and there will be a shortfall in infrastructure creation in the country. I believe NIP is more a kind of a dream which you draw out. It's not totally attainable, but yes, we move towards these targets.
Yeah, I see some of in the audience we have the managers from the NBFCs, and just to be able to deal with some of the issues that they are facing, long back, Professor Barnali and Mr. Gaurav, they had raised issues for certain relief from the RBI, which were the NBFC specific. And one such, though it appears to be, a micro level, but it has larger implication on the balance sheet of NBFC, was expected credit loss. They wanted a reprieve from the new accounting standards, requiring them to adopt the expected credit loss method for provisioning. Now, Professor Barnali, do you justify what they was? What they were looking? If you just in a brief, you can respond to that.
Yes, sir. Actually, the entire portfolio is going to change. With this current uncertainty, and you have to revalue the entire portfolio. In fact, you may also think of changing your business model if you take India's 109. So in this case, say for example, if you have to see what kind of loans or what kind of assets, financial instruments you have in your portfolio. So suppose you see, and you have to judge it on case by case basis. Say you have to see where in which industry have you invested, have you given loan. So based on the macro of that industry, you should revalue your portfolio. Now, for example, if you are increasing the credit period of say receivables by another 30 days, that's really not going to have a lot of consideration on the value of that receivable, but definitely the probability of default will increase. So if probability of default is increasing, so that means you have to again reassess your portfolio. And once you are doing that, once you are reassessing your expected credit loss is increasing, so in that case what will happen, your extra provisioning that you have to do for this extra ECL, you are taking it through your FVOCI, that is fair value of other comprehensive income, which is again going to hit your capital. And if your capital is hit, then of course you have to infuse some fresh capital in order to have the proper capital adequacy norm. Now the question is then, should we not allow provisioning? Should we not do extra provisioning? I think this is the question you wanted me to ask. Now, I would say that if you have to go for further provisioning, then obviously your income is going to be, your profit is going to be it. But the question is that how long can you postpone it? It's better that you do it once and clean your balance sheet. That will have a better effect. Although NBFCs will say that will have a great hit on our income statement, great hit on our financial statement, it should be postponed. But I would say that, rather than postponing it, just do a one-time adjustment and make your balance sheet clean. That is what I feel.
I would only add that, the International Federation of Accountants have come out with a clarification. When you work out the expected credit loss, and in fact, that is what is bothered most of the NBFCs, is that when you work out ECL, you not only take into account the downturn or the negative aspects, but also take into account the positive aspects, the government announcements. And when you factor that into your workings, then possibly you are able to mitigate what the extraordinary situation of the COVID is
Absolutely, sir. That's why I said case by case basis, looking at the kind of industry where you have invested your money.
I would say it's very difficult time for the NBFCs. NBFCs which do not have their own deep pocket, and the NBFCs which do not have a strong parentage, which with a deep pockets, they might see bad days lying ahead. And possibly, Mr. Madan, you would agree that we are in for a consolidation phase in the NBFC sector in a big way, not only in the NBFC sector, but also in the lot of sectors, because those who are in the liquidity, they will be looking for the opportunity for the acquisitions. I believe we have another 10 to 15 minutes time, and I would just touch upon one important aspect. I've just received a message from Mr. Jay Shankar that is still head up in the MOF, and possibly he would join us some other time. He told me that possibly he might join while he's on the way to his office. Possibly that is also not possible. What is happening is that are we as a managers or as a company prepared for the risk that was lying ahead? When I'm saying so, we were knowing about the COVID in the month of November, December. Of course, till a couple of days ago, everybody said that we possibly came to know in the month of February. But the news reports, in fact, today ICMR itself confirmed that possibly in India, we were aware of by November 11 that there is something like COVID and virus, and that's going to affect. Was the industry aware of it? Were they expected to be aware of it? Whether somewhere the management of the banks, the management of these companies have failed in foreseeing maybe uncertain situation. And if they were aware of, did they fail to fortify themselves for the, for the possible pitfalls or the adverse situation that lies ahead? Well, I'm saying so, I know for certain MNCs, way back in the month of January itself, they issued advisory to their officials not to travel abroad without the permission of the top management. They started liquidating their investments, so they remain liquid in order to face the crisis which was looming at large at that point of time. When we look in terms of, I'm not talking about the country context, but I'm talking about the company context and the company management context, and the preparedness and the ability and the capability of the professional managers to manage those situations. And if so they were liquidating, they were able to manage. When we look in terms of the Indian context or in larger context of the corporate sector, they were possibly ill prepared to face these situations. What is that the management have failed? And second thing is that the management curriculum that is in India, does that enough take care of? I believe that does take care of the risk management, but we are moving far away from the risk management to the management of uncertainties. We know what happened in 1991. We know what happened in 2008, 2016. These all fall in the realm of the uncertainties. Mr. Madan, you keep on interacting with the management at large and also different sectors of the economy. Do you think they were ill-equipped? Do you think you yourself, is a professional in that perspective, that our management curriculum adequately focus on management and uncertainties, or management for uncertainties? Or do we need to change our curriculum? And later on, Professor Barnali, I would also seek your intelligence.
See, the thing is, we should remember that this pandemic is a black swan event. So when you say it's a black swan, it is something which was totally out of the blue, totally unexpected. So I wouldn't say it's been a management failure, because I think when it came up, I think it was more of a health-related issue. And nobody really expected that there would be a lockdown. Because as I started off my my session out here by saying that COVID per se is not what has destroyed the economy. It is the shutdown which has destroyed the economy. So nobody knew that there was going to be a shutdown. But I'm quite sure in future, like see, we have had catastrophes like earthquakes, we have had cyclones and tornadoes. Everybody has a disaster recovery setup which is there. So I think companies are well prepared for these kind of disasters. But this is definitely a once in a lifetime kind of an event, which nobody really expected to spread across the world, and nobody really expected this would lead to a lockdown. But I'm quite sure in future there will be more caution which will be shown. So I wouldn't say there's anything wrong in our management or in our management books. This is not something which you can really prepare for. It's something like saying that if there's a thunderbolt to come tomorrow and all of us are supposed to die, I think that's something which nobody can really prepare for. So I think these are just a very unfortunate incident. Nobody was prepared for it, and we've landed in this kind of a situation. It'll of course give us some kind of experience for future, but I wouldn't blame anybody for this.
Professor Bernali?
Sir, in fact, I would say that, I was actually discussing with one of a very senior managing director of a finance company. And he gave me a very interesting, I asked him the same question. He gave me a very interesting answer. And he said, Professor Bernali, I never allow my two senior persons to travel in the same aircraft. I said, why do you do that? He said, because I have to be very prepared. These are all planning. No textbook will teach you all these things. You have to be very prepared. If your CFO and CEO are traveling by the same aircraft and the aircraft crashes, then what will happen? So this is something very interesting. Another thing he told me is that, when like I always see to it that in the balance sheet, I have enough liquidity position is enough to meet my next 3 months obligation. That means I should not be categorized as an NPA and I should not be downgraded by any of the credit rating agency. So in fact, many of his colleagues used to ask him that, why do you keep money in the balance sheet? You can invest it somewhere and earn greater profit. He said, no, my loss in the long term, when I have an NPA from the bank and I'm downgraded by credit rating agency, is something that I will really have a problem at that point of time. So he told me that, these are some of the common sense things that no textbook can teach. These are all practitioners and case studies, academic case studies can teach. Another thing I feel, Professor Haldia, is that, like, for example, you see infrastructure project financing. We were talking of so much of asset liability mismatch. Why? Because people are procuring funds short term and investing in infrastructure sector. Now, they know that infrastructure sector will slow down or the projects will stall. So therefore, this kind of subject is very essential because after this COVID impact, after this lockdown impact, government will have to infuse money not only in the financial sector but also in the infrastructure sector in case they want to develop Indian economy. Then these days, like I feel that lockdown and COVID has made us very disciplined, very disciplined, and it has made us more tech savvy also. So now the management institute curriculum should have topics or should have subjects that will be more of digital, something like blockchain, something like digital marketing, etc. So all these kinds of subjects have to be taught to these people. So that is what I feel.
I think I entirely agree with you, Professor Bernali, because as a conventional manager, I have always been taught to be not conservative, but to be prudent and be mindful of the uncertain events which do not come by for warning you. So it's always better to remain liquid and always keep your balance sheet liquid to face those uncertain situation. I have one question, Sabi. I'll just take quickly, which says that one of many questions that I'll take up is that can we say anything about today's Supreme Court comment on waiving 6 months interest on moratorium EMI? Well, the matter is before the Supreme Court, and we'll not like to comment upon that. But certainly, these are the financial matter, and RBI, as I've been given to understand, RBI has also told the court what does it mean in terms of the financial implication, and what does it mean in terms of the health of the banks and the balance sheet of the banks and the financial institutions. So obviously, there is something we ought to be doing and something we need to be mindful of impact of what we ought to be doing. So both the things have to be kept into account. So I would thank all the panelists. It was a great pleasure and talking to you, very absorbing, very interacting. And thank you, Mr. Madan. And in fact, one of the questions that sometime I will ask you later on privately, you had written one book, How to Fool All the People All the Times. And that's precisely what's happening all around. And we often say that you can make fool one person once, but you cannot make him fool all the times. But you have been, I mean, your book talks about how to fool all the people all the times, and that possibly what's happening. We need to be careful of such persons who make us fool all the time. So maybe some other time we would have opportunity to interact with that. And then certainly this has been very, very thought-provoking, interactive session. I would only say that in 2000, in December, November 2019, the COVID. In January, we thought we can win over the COVID. In February, we thought we will fight against the COVID. And in March, we thought we'll have to live with the COVID. And in the month of April, we possibly felt helpless, and we thought possibly in substance, we need to surrender to the COVID and think in our own ways. That's how the COVID journey has been, and that's what it reflects, that what's impact that it had so far, and its known and unknown effect that it might have again in the financial sector. But as a manager, it's our responsibility to be mindful of what that might, what the scenario analysis for the next 6 months and 12 months. And as we've been taught in the management, to be mindful of all the scenario and possibly be prepared for all the scenarios, so that in case of what situation happens, at least we as a company do not collapse. We are still able to survive and sustain. With that, thank you very much, Mr. Madan. Thank you, Mr. Gaurav. And Mr. Gaurav, please pass on message to Mr. Jaishankar that we missed him, and maybe we'll have some other opportunity.
Sure, sir.
To be with him, and and Professor Bernali, thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us.